welcome to ctl-alt-del-church, and this week I'm delighted to be joined from the Costa del Clyde by Paul Beautyman. How are you, Paul?
I'm very well, thank you, Stewart. Very well, yes.
Excellent. You are where in the world?
Okay, so I live in Dunoon, which is on the Cowell Peninsula, not an island, despite trying to get parcels delivered. So Cowell is just across the water from Greenock or Gourock. We get a wee boat across, or you can drive over the rest of me, thankful, and come down. You're all welcome whenever. Absolutely,
and I would endorse wholeheartedly that you do go and visit. I used to live there, so back in the day, 100 years ago, my dad was the minister at Cummunstrone in Ardentiny, so I spent my formative years, and I mean formative years in Dunoon. So I moved there when I was 15 or something like that. So it's a great place, but yeah, you're right. It's not an island. You can drive when the Rest and Be Thankful's open. So yeah. So how did you end up there? Because that's not where you started off with. So let's go all the way back then. So when I first met you, I think you were probably working for National Mission, weren't you?
Yep, that's right, Stuart. I trained as a minister and thought I would go into parish ministry, but bring in a kind of interest in young people and holiday clubs and such like, which I'd done as a volunteer. But my first job was at St Ninian's Centre, the Church Scotland Centre it used to be. And that's where the missions coordinator was based. So there were two parts of the job, Stuart. One was organising weekends where youth fellowships and youth clubs would come to the weekends at St Ninian's. And the second part was going out and organising the summer mission programme. And the summer mission programme became the high school missions as we began to think, well, where are young people? They're not all on the beaches of Girvan, although Girvan ran some great summer missions over the years. And we began experimenting with reaching out to young people and children beyond the holidays. So that was from 93 to 2001, I did that job, Stuart. 2001, 2002, I went back to college for a year because I began to feel that to work with the community and work in the community while still for the church, I needed a bit more support training. So I ended up doing a postgraduate certificate in community education at Jordan Hill, which is now knocked down, sadly, that great building up there. And in 2002, 2009, I worked in Edinburgh, in Gilmerton, South Edinburgh, and that was planting a church for young people. So again, still part of National Mission. And that was an old church that had effectively closed, but it worked in partnership with the churches in South Edinburgh to plant a church for young people and their families. In 2009, came through here to Argyll and worked for Argyll Presbytery and advising across the whole of Argyll and Bute, which is a coastline larger than France. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
Well, it does. All these lovely islands, 9 high schools across this lovely rural presbytery. And then also the second part of that job was we built a youth project here in Dunoon called EXP. And I did that from 2009 to 2019. And that brings me to Youth Work Journeys where I am now. So that's a wee brief summary.
So that's a broad time frame. You know, neither of us are nearly as young as we used to be. So things have changed a lot in terms of how we think about our work with young people across that time. And you said yourself, in the middle of that, you decided to go back and have a think about, some of the, what's been going on and the different kinds of approaches and that kind of thing when you went back to Jordan Hill. So how would you, if you were looking back now on Paul and, the 1990s, what would you say to him? Because the stuff that we were both doing in those days was great. Folk loved it. We had a great time. We were just reflecting before we pressed record that, there was lots of silliness, lots of games, lots of making people do ridiculous things. And in the middle of all of that, somehow telling them about Jesus. But there's a bit of a kind of, that's not how we do that anymore. Kind of thing. So how's your thinking? Has it moved? Has it changed? What do you think of that kind of period when you look back a bit and think, what was going on then, and would that work now?
Oh, sure. Good questions. I remember back at my induction, so that was 1992, and whoever it was that was preaching, and I can't remember who it was, he said something like, and just go and be yourself. And I often think, half the congregation cheered and half the congregation groaned. But I would look back, Stuart, and tell myself in those younger years, just stick with it. Not in an arrogant way, I hope, hopefully not an arrogant way, but just that your gut is probably right. And it's taken me a long time, Stuart, to stick with what I believe to be true. I often felt that after my initial 5 or 10 years in ministry, began to feel I defined myself by who I wasn't. You know, I'm not like that organisation, or I'm not as something as that. I'm not as something as that. And it's taken me maybe the last 5 years or so, Stuart, the last 5, 10 years, to go, well, this is who I am. This is who God's made me to be. So I think I'll go back to those early years. And something I've often thought, Stuart, that when we used to run summer mission teams, they were the exception, you know. But I think what we used to do in summer mission teams, the exception should have become the normal. Give you an example. When we used to do prayers, or in fact anything on a summer mission team, the expectation was that everybody was in, unless you chose to come out. So if that was doing the holiday clubs, leading the games, doing the funny stories, doing the Bible stories, if it was washing the dishes, if it was doing the prayers, the expectation was that everybody shared in everything, unless you had a really good reason not to. And then someone would say, okay, I'll help you with that. Come on, let's not do it this week, but we'll help you do it next time. But church culture, I would suggest, is very much the opposite. It's everybody's out, unless you choose to join in. And I think if I had been stronger in that, Stuart, and saying, no, that should be the culture of the church, that we all do everything, rather than just leaving it all to the minister and most of us sit back, or we leave it to the staff member. So yeah, I think 2 things there, Stuart. I would encourage me as a younger person to just go for it. But I'm grateful for those who supported me through those times. And yeah, that expectation that everybody in church has a role to play, rather than asking for the volunteer to do 1 or 2 things. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, that sense of looking back and thinking, right, so what was it we were doing, and what did we think we were trying to do? And I think you're right, Paul, that about creating a community that is engaging for everybody. But one of the things that we did around that, I think, was we said to people things like, come and volunteer because you can help other people. And actually, the thing that we missed out on saying to people is, come and volunteer because it's really good for you. And it'll help you to understand what church is, how that could work, and then take that back into your own place. So sometimes we would come together and we'd, get a team and we'd go and do a thing. And it was all about helping other people in that place. But actually what was happening was we were growing people through that volunteering experience. And that happened in all kinds of ways. So it would happen through the summer mission programs, and then the kind of impact teams later, or through youth assembly, or through, whatever it might be. Actually, what it was about was, for me, it was about faith formation and just building people, and building their spiritual lives. But at the time, I don't think I don't know that I really realised that's what we were doing until a bit later on.
Yes, training was something that was kind of bolted on before or after, rather than the learning by the doing. Maybe that's something we've probably both learned over the years, Stuart, about reflective learning and the benefit of saying, okay, we've had this great experience, this bad experience. So what are we learning? And I think one of my favourite questions I would ask youth workers or trainees or students over the last number of years is, so what are you learning? And just as you walk the street with somebody after being doing a lunch club in the school or whatever, we're always learning. Or we've always got the potential to learn.
And what we need, I suppose, in that, and I suppose where we find you now is helping people to do that, because it doesn't necessarily come naturally to people. I think we've all heard we tried that once. It's this kind of standard church response to things. Well, great, that's great that you tried that once. But nobody's ever made a thing work the first time. It's a fluke. if it's good the first time, because actually what we need to do is learn and grow and develop and all that kind of stuff. So is that where we find you now? This youth work journey sounds a bit more like being alongside people and helping to do that, just as you've described, the conversation that goes alongside or after or before, what is it,
Yeah, I think I sometimes wonder, Stuart, if the Church of Scotland is a great teaching organisation, but I'm not convinced that we're a good learning organisation. And that's, kind of a tension I feel. But yeah, Youth Work Journeys go back to about 2017, and I was driving up a road you'll know well, up past Locheck, Strucker, up to Rest Me Thankful, up towards Cairndhu, and it's one of the few occasions, Stuart, where I had like a wee God whisper, kind of a line. I've described it before someone else. It was like there was a voice inside me, without hearing the voice outside me, and the voice just simply said, "Released into life." And I thought, I don't know what it meant, Stuart. It wasn't a line from a song or a hymn or a scripture. No one had given me it before. So I began in 2017 to try and restructure the job, the Argyll Presbytery Youth Advisor and the Cowell work with the churches and the EXP Youth Project, and then ended up focusing more on the EXP Youth Project, which was growing and is still growing well, a year or so after I've left, which is great. But I got to the point, my wife and kids and I was preaching out on, I forgot which island it was now. Was it Colonsay? It's Colonsay. And Pauline was saying, no, you just need to finish, So I thought, there's another part of the story, Stuart, another island. I usually go away every May with some buddies, and we do like a wild camping trip.
Yeah.
Out under the tents, open fires, and just great times. And we're sitting around the fire, the kind of friends that you don't see for a year, and then you sit down and go, you pick up the conversation. So we were sharing, and I was sharing this story of being given this release into life line, and not quite knowing what it meant. And the next day, Crawford Bell, Crawford, Crawford Bell was there, and he came up to me and said, what comes to me as a line, you've paid your dues. And he said, yeah, you don't owe anyone anymore. And I've realised over the years, Stuart, that I'm quite a loyal person. Mm-hmm. And the thought of leaving the Church of Scotland felt like a betrayal, because there's so many amazing people, ministers, staff workers, ordinary members. But that allowed me to go, I can leave without feeling like I was letting the side down or abandoning ship. So a year ago, I left the Church of Scotland, although I'm still a registered minister, and I left the EXP Youth Project that we'd set up. And I ended up doing 2 part-time jobs, one with active schools, 3 days a week, and doing some youth work in the grammar school here in Dunoon, sort of pupil support work. But alongside it, ended up setting up my own business, Youth Work Journeys. And the Journeys language, Stuart, is, over the years, my experience of training was often we tried to put as much in as we could, because a volunteer, a staff member, or a student was there and you wanted to cram it in. But what's really shaped me over the years is folk who have walked with me, journeyed with me, been with me. And so the idea of Youth Work Journeys is to come alongside people and to journey with them and to offer 3 areas of mentoring, training, and growing your own leaders. Briefly, mentoring, that for someone who's maybe starting off in their career in youth work and wondering, asking the questions, and to sit with them and go deeper with them. Or it might be someone, Stuart, they've been doing youth work for a long time, but either because things are going really well or because things are going quite badly, they're starting to ask the big questions of life and about faith and about who they are and how they can continue. And the training is shaped around the needs of the organisation and the church, the youth project, delivering all online just now. But hopefully when COVID ends, we would actually go and meet people, sit with them. And the Grow Your Own is how we grow our own leaders. I've been fortunate over the years to have worked with some amazing young leaders who started off as young kids running mental around the hall or the church, but ended up becoming splendid leaders. So that's what I do now.
The being released thing, I think, is really interesting. I have a kind of similar kind of thought. I think that, eventually I did the same. I left and went to work for the NHS for a couple of years because I felt that at some point you have to go away, even if it's just for a wee while. But there is this kind of because we foster such a sense of belonging, and there's an investment in you as a person. I was tremendously lucky over the years that I worked for the Church of Scotland to be able to do some training, to do a degree, kind of a master's, and all those kinds of stuff that I wouldn't necessarily have got the opportunity to do in different places. Yeah. And as you say, at the same time, have all these amazing people around you and as part of the things that you do. And so there is this kind of sense that, well, why would you walk away from that? Because you've got such a huge stake in it.
Yeah.
And at some points, the church changes, and the bit of the church that I worked for and the bit of the church that you worked for joined together. And everything changed for that. So some people left, some people were kept on, some people, were made redundant and all that kind of stuff, but everything changed. So sometimes it's at those moments that people feel, right, hold on a minute, this isn't for me anymore. But that's not, you've made deliberate decisions, I think, to move on and to change at points that it felt as though God was calling you to be somewhere else. Nobody else made those decisions for you. You thought, right, well, hold on a minute, I'm going to go and do this, and then I'm going to go and do this. And then to be faced with, you've paid your dues, but you've paid your dues means you've got tons of experience that you can share with people.
Hopefully.
That's what I hear. It's not that you don't owe anybody anything anymore. It's that actually you've been doing this for a long time now, and you've got a really broad and deep understanding of what it is. You've been in loads of different situations. You've worked with people all around the country at various different ages and stages. So who would be better placed than you to be able to say to people, look, see if you want to chat about this. I've been there probably, but I've also got some thoughts about that that might help. I might ask you, I always think sometimes it's about helping people to ask the right questions about what they're doing. And that's what it feels like you're saying. I think that's really exciting. So how are folk engaging with that? Has that been something that you felt people are looking for, or are they reluctant, or are they a bit, what do you mean?
It's an interesting one, Stuart. A lot of people are very affirming, absolutely, and saying similar things to what you've just said, and that's great. I'm a bit grateful for that support. The interesting area is when you start talking about money.
Uh-huh.
And one thing I've had to learn is how I cost myself.
Yeah.
And learning slowly to be upfront and say, okay, so free consultation, that's fine. And then I draw up, after that couple of hours consultation, I then draw up a training package or a mentoring package, and I give it back to them and say, okay, that would be X hours, over 6 months or whatever, and it'll cost you this. And I'm getting better at that. And it's interesting, Stuart, the number of people who say, yeah, good. If it was a church boiler, or if it was a church roof, the roofer or the plumber would come along and say, okay, it's going to cost you this. Here's the hours, here's the parts.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get better. I am getting better at doing that.
Good.
But it is a journey. It is a bit of a journey. I think I'm looking. There's almost a kind of sweet spot, Stuart, I'm trying to find, because there's folks who are doing great youth work, and they're already involved in, I've called them tribes. Mm-hmm. So they might already have their support and their nourishment through the Scripture Union tribe, or the Young Life tribe, or the FYT tribe, or the Youth for Christ tribe, or whatever. And that's great. Don't want to diminish any of the work of any of these great, Christian youth work organisations in Scotland. At the other extreme, there's folks who just aren't able to do anything. And I don't feel that that's what I can support just now. Maybe I've been able to do that in the past. So I'm trying to find folks somewhere in the middle who are doing something, but aren't certain of how to go forward, or that they're facing struggles. And in fact, another area I'm working on, Stuart, is kind of trying to be online more, and recognising that people, that's where they live and that's where they find the resources, their training. So someone put together a great website for me, which I'm grateful for, which is www.youthworkjourneys.com. There you go. And being on Facebook, getting connections that way. But a lot of it, I find, is word of mouth.
Yeah.
I'm talking with someone and they'll mention a church and I go, oh, I'm going to just give them a phone.
Yeah.
Or someone says to me, oh, I heard from somebody else. And it's an odd situation just now in that I've been furloughed from active schools. So instead of working 3 days a week, I'm only working 1 day a week. And at the start of the year, I was thinking, I probably need to drop this so that I've got more time to devote. But the idea of handing back a salary when you've got a wife and kids and a mortgage.
Yeah.
But here I am. I'm being paid still by active schools, and I'm grateful for that. But I've got 2 days, Wednesday, Thursday, today, to devote to Youth Work Journey stuff. So, aye.
So it's working out okay?
So far. It's getting
difficult. You before we were chatting, we were kind of laughing about the kinds of things that we got folk to do, drinking cans of juice through a sock and all that kind of stuff. And you said I'm an introvert, and I inwardly smiled and thought, yeah, so am I. But we learn how to not be. You kind of do I can stand up and talk in front of people, but I need to go for a lie down afterwards.
Yes.
And I think sometimes, that there's an enormous benefit to being an introvert, in that you like to be reflective often.
Yes.
But the downside is that you need to pick up the phone and particularly if you're starting something new, put yourself out there and say, look, hiya, can I help? And for someone who's an introvert, that's a terrifying prospect.
So somebody said to me, and I can't remember who it was, I wish I could remember, he said, if you stop thinking about promoting yourself and think about promoting your ministry.
Yeah.
I thought, that kind of worked for me. And I thought, it's not about promoting me, it's about promoting the work that I'm doing.
Yeah.
In the same way that I might promote it if I'd heard someone else was doing it. So again, that's the reason why I sometimes find myself talking about Youth Work Journeys, because I can talk about Youth Work Journeys and go, Youth Work Journeys is great.
Yeah.
It's mentoring, it's training, it's supporting youth workers in a way that there's just something inside me doesn't click when I say, oh, I can do that.
Yeah.
So,
because Youth Work Journeys is you. You are that resource. You're providing all those. But in the same way that you would hire a plumbing company, but it's one guy in a van.
That's right. That's exactly it. And I think almost the Youth Work Journeys label is a way of me hiding behind that, in a sense, to push that out there. And then when folk go to the website or contact me, you're right. Once the personal is there, I'm happy.
And it's a thing that the church has a kind of really odd kind of relationship with, the idea of the fact that we might actually be competent, and but also the kind of I have this conversation with my wife all the time. She's like, I don't like to blow my own trumpet, and I'm like, but it's okay to have a trumpet. If you can play the trumpet, what's the point in hiding all of that? That actually we're kind of don't want to brag, don't want to show off. But the reality is, as you've said, you've got years of experience and something to give back that folk are looking for. So why not tell people about that? We're not doing, it's the hiding your light under a bushel thing. We're not doing anybody any good by being falsely modest.
There's a great book, Stewart, The Scots Crisis of Confidence.
Mm-hmm.
I've forgotten the lady's first name, Anne Craig. And she analyses why, in particular, Scots, and she compares the line, we're all Jock Tamson's bairns. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And she would say in America, there's a similar theme that, we're all the same. We're all the same. But in Scotland, we're all the same. So don't get above yourself.
Yeah.
Whereas in America, we're all the same. So why not me? And I thought, gosh, that's it, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm doing a kind of PhD part-time just now. And one of the issues I'm looking at is how are folks sustained for the long term? And personality type, I think, is part of it. And sure, there's so many questions pumping out of this studying that I'm doing. But questions about personality type, what sustains you, knowing if you know who you are, then you can be sustained. But I suspect a lot of youth workers get drawn into being someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps because the youth worker that nourished them, they want to be like that.
Yeah.
Or there's a myth that you've got to be the Duracell bunny. Mm-hmm. And we can all be the Duracell bunny for a couple of years.
Yeah.
But actually, not many of us can keep it going. And actually, because not many of us are Duracell bunnies.
Yeah.
So finding out who you are and how God nourishes you and who you're meant to be is quite a challenge, because it means sometimes going, that's not me anymore.
Yeah. I remember vividly, quite a long time ago now, going to do an assessment for college to see a youth worker who was, and still is, an introvert. I mean, like off the scale introvert. And she was terrified of doing all of that. My supervisor says I've got to do all this, stand up, be charismatic, and she was incredible at building relationships with people.
Yeah.
But it wasn't valued, because they wanted somebody to be up at the front and, do this all singing, all dancing stuff, which is, it's important. But actually, what she was doing was this really quiet, deep ministry that the young people she was working with really appreciated, but the people that she was working for couldn't see, because that's not what they thought youth work should look like, or youth ministry should look like. They were looking for guitars with rainbow straps and big games, and and all of which is great. But at the end of the day, she knew her kids, and she knew them really well, and they came to her for all kinds of stuff, and she supported them through all kinds of things, and was doing a brilliant thing. But thought she was rubbish because just that that folk, that wasn't her personality type, and there was no place for that somehow in what we do. I'm going to pull you up on something there. You're not doing a kind of PhD. You're doing a PhD. It's a real PhD, and that's but that's the same thing, isn't it? I'm just doing this wee doctoral thesis.
I suppose that's true. Yeah, and part of that, Stewart, is one of the things I realised early on in the kind of limited bits of reading I was doing was there's a lack of Scottish voices.
Yeah.
There's great Scottish voices in church, in theology, in kind of adult church, that are worldwide, and there are great youth workers writing worldwide about Christian youth work, but not in Scotland.
Yeah.
And part of me doing this study is hopefully an encouragement. There's been a hold up in my ethics applications because of COVID and all that. But when I get to my interviews, hopefully very soon, it's going to be part of that is trying to create more people in Scotland who are thinking deeply about Christian youth work or youth ministry and saying, let's not be down on ourselves because we're Scottish and we just do youth work. But I was thinking about it, that youth workers very often aren't asked to be deep. And so if you're not asked to be deep, you're not going to stop and do it, And we've probably overemphasised activity. You've got a 2-year contract. You've got a 3-year contract. Just get busy. Yeah. Get there, do the stuff.
Wow. And some of that's about, it has to be attractional, because the way that we're going to judge whether you've been successful or not is we're going to count the number of people that come along on a Thursday night.
Yeah.
We're not going to look at the depth of engagement. We're not going to look at faith development. We're not, we're just going to count people, and so you end up doing stuff that you'll bring them in, we can count and tick a box, and And it seems, Stuart, I think
there's two extremes that don't seem to like talking to each other. There's one that says it's about community contacts, and there's one that says it's about spiritual formation of the core. And I've seen both really successful. So you get some groups, and I'll mention no names this time, and churches who are great at doing the nurturing the spiritual core, but they can be not getting out into the world because that's a place of danger, and it's about trying to draw a few more folk in. Then there's others who are absolutely brilliant at being out in the community, but they're hesitant to talk of deep matters or Christian spiritual formation or whatever. So it's trying to get both to work together. And I can see places where it is working, and that's where there's real growth, because the spiritual core goes into the wider world, the wider community. There's a circle of growth that goes on.
Do you think then that's reflected in people, in youth workers? So I was always really aware that actually what I do is what I'm comfortable with, and I'm still aware of that. So I've ended up in a parish, and I'm acutely aware sometimes that what we end up doing is what I like.
Yeah.
But that's what we do, and some of that's because I feel as though, that's maybe where my skills lie. And so, I'll make the most of, my trumpet, I'll get my trumpet out and I'll play my trumpet, and that, that's what I can do. But at the same time, you were talking about personality types. I remember when I went for my ministerial assessment, one of the things that we did a couple of these, the kind of Myers-Briggs type personality things. And that wasn't so much as part of the assessment, it was to help us. So then what happened was, a psychologist sat down with us and said, so you're this, right? And that means that these kinds of people will be really easy for you. Because they like similar things and they understand what you're talking about. But you're going to have people like this who have no idea what you're talking about, because the thing that they're interested in doesn't sound like what you're saying. Yeah. And that for me was like a light bulb moment. I think, I've been aware of all these personality types for years and years and years, but I don't understand how other people think. And even that they do think differently. I just think, why don't they understand me? This isn't that hard.
Yes.
And I wonder sometimes if, excuse the dogs again, if what youth workers do is they do that. I'm interested in spiritual formation, so that's what we'll do. I'm interested in community contact, so that's what we'll do. Rather than being aware of themselves and thinking, well, we're only doing that because that's what I'm interested in, and I'm scared to do the other thing, or I don't know how to do the other thing, or nobody's ever asked me about the other thing, or I've never even seen the other thing.
Yes.
I'm just doing what I do. And so, I guess being involved in a reflective process like you're offering allows people to say, all right, there's other ways to do this. Where am I?
I think for me, Stuart, the key thing is about team. I remember when I was in South Edinburgh, planting a church for young people and their families through the Church Scotland's NCD, New Charge Development Programme. But what was great was there was a real partnership amongst the 3 or 4 other Church of Scotland's in that area and an independent evangelical church. And when I began back in the summer mission days, I think the expectation was that I was an evangelist. And I maybe never thought that I was, but thought I could do it. But then I realised that there are actually folk who are gifted at evangelism. We can all tell of our faith. And my probably gifts and calling was just about being out and about. And it's been helpful for me, Stuart, when someone highlighted the Ephesians 4 thing, apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teacher. And I've realised that I'm an apostle, in that if there's an edge, I want to be there. Whether it's an edge of thoughts or an edge of where the young people not quite there. So developing high school missions back in the late 90s, working in a high school as a chaplain, but just hanging out in the school. And when I came to Dunoon, again, we ran with EXP a brilliant Friday night club that was based on the work myself and others were doing in the high school, supported by the Church of Scotland's, but the evangelistic edge was provided by a local Baptist church and the local Baptist pastor. And he and I are complementary, shall we say. We're different, but we loved working together. And I think the churches that I see growing in their youth work are the ones that are saying there's a whole team of people. So the apostle who's out at the edge, the prophet, the voice of criticism, the evangelist, the decision maker, the shepherd who cares for people, and the teacher who does the teaching. And sometimes helping youth workers go, well, which one are you? And which ones are you not? And therefore, who do you need to find to be part of your team? And sometimes it's the young persons themselves that grow through, that give that breadth. I think the problem is, Stuart, some of our churches are defined by just one of these things. And rather than then going, okay, so we might feel we're very much community-based, but we need to have other churches. They get a bit defensive and a bit, oh, well, we're not them. We don't want to work with them, and that's a shame.
Yeah, and I think, particularly, if you're talking about the likes of the Church of Scotland, you've got a parish. There isn't another one of you. There might be a neighbour, and you might be working in the same town, or all that kind of stuff. But the reality is you're supposed to serve your patch. So if you're only doing one of those things, then the people of your patch are being denied.
Yes.
The other four.
Yes.
And so, if and the one man band kind of thing, and it has been primarily one men band. That's I think a feature of that kind of ministry, that it's about me. I'll do my thing, and if folk come, they come, and if they don't, well, that's not my problem, because they asked me to come here and be me. But with no recognition that, as you said, there might be other people around that are brilliant at doing all this other stuff.
Yep.
And my job is to enable them to do that, and not to be dead precious about everything, and to say, well, you can't do that because, you've not got one of these funny collars, or you've, whatever the reason might be, that we stop people from, as you did right at the back at the beginning, you said, it's about everybody doing everything and finding your bit in that. And, if that's not what church is and what it's for and what it looks like, then what are we doing?
One of my favourite lines that I'll say to youth workers or students that I've worked with is, the move from me to we is a real challenge, because a lot of youth workers, as they grow up, as they come into as a young person, in a lovely way, it's about them being themselves, and it's how they attract a crowd, how they interact, and brilliant that they do that. But then the next stage, I want to say to them, okay, it's from me to we. How do you then enable the us, the we, to do the work? And that's a kind of challenging transition.
It is. I'm laughing because I get pastoral supervision, and I talk in we all the time. And occasionally, my pastoral supervisor will say, "Have you not done anything?" Where are you in this? Because that's the purpose of the supervision. But yeah, you're right. It's not mine. And the reality is, in all of these kinds of posts, whether you're working with young people or with grown-ups or whatever, you're temporary in that. Yeah. This community will be here long after I'm gone, and however that happens, whether I get run over by a bus tomorrow, or I retire gracefully when I'm 70 or whatever, but Stonehouse will still be here, and somebody else will come along and do this kind of work, so yes. If it's not about we, then, there's far too much of me then in that, I think.
I've heard people often say, working yourself out of a job. And I almost disagree, actually, because I think, no, if you're that enabler, I want you to stay in that job, because you're constantly enabling and you're constantly bringing on others. I think, no, that's brilliant. Stay there. Rather than thinking, I brought on the next team, I'll leave. No, because you might be replaced by a person who comes in and goes, right, I can do it all now. Yeah,
it's about creating capacity. Yeah. And that capacity then just increases, doesn't it? You can do more and more and more things if more and more people are involved and engaged and skilled.
And it comes back to what we think of as youth work. If we think of youth work as kind of entertainment, then you've got one person up front, people behind the scenes. If you think of it as a school, it's about education, maybe, teacher to pupil ratio with a couple of specialists coming in, and schools are great places. But if we see the Christian life for young people as family, well, the ratio of adults to young people in a family, is it 1-to-1, 1-to-2, maybe sometimes 3 or 4 adults to 1. And that's not to say that we only work with a few young people. But if we had that image in our head, then of course we want to keep bringing volunteers in and other adults, because the more we have, the more we can do that one that you talked about earlier with the girl, the more we can do that 1-to-1 relational stuff, and keep growing it.
One of the questions that we've started kind of grappling with, the title of this podcast is based on the forced quit thing that you do in a computer when it stops working. So you have to choose the things to shut down that aren't kind of working anymore. And what you're describing sounds quite different from the kind of standard church model that we've all become used to. So in your head, what does church look like? What should it look like? What could it look like? What would the kind of key things about church be for you?
I'll give you a couple of lines in a wee piece of honest story. I talk about a more than vision for the church, a more than, and it's about more than Sundays. So it's how can the church be a Christian community active during the week? And linked to that second one is it's more than just worship. So it's about service, it's about evangelism, it's about mission, it's about education, it's about sacraments. So there's fellowship. It's more than just worship. And it's about more than an individual staff member or minister. My fear, Stewart, is that as the church is squeezed ever so thinly, it just sticks with a limited function done by a limited number of people. Sadly, often funerals and pastoral care of the dead and dying by a few skilled specialists. And sometimes those specialists are lay people as well as clergy. So these specialists will focus on doing the worship, administration, and funerals. And I've seen so many lovely, good colleagues who feel they're drawn into that, where 10 years ago there were 2 or 3 ministers in a town or a rural area, but now there's only one. Ironically, churches that are growing seem to be the ones that are equipping all their people to do a number of the different functions of the church throughout the week. My honest reflection on that, Stewart, is I'm not part of an established church just now, and I say that with sadness. I was part of a Christian community called Uri in Dunoon, that were folks who had been through established church and had a variety of experiences of that, some positive, some negative. You could call it a house group, I suppose, and it was lovely. It was just very affirming and a great Christian community for me and my family. Some people left, some people moved on, different issues, and that sadly no longer continues. So I don't attend weekly worship, and there's still something in me that goes, Sunday morning, I should be at church, but I'm not. And what I would still yearn for and enjoy is Christian community. So hanging out with other Christians, and then the worship and the support and the fellowship, the learning is just rooted in real relationships. And yeah, when lockdown ends, I hope I could rediscover that again or contribute to that.
I wonder if, you talked about not being part of a formal Christian community. I wonder if that's where lots of people will find themselves at the end of this. That we talked for years about the Sunday school in some ways teaches kids not to come to church because we send them off somewhere else. And after it's a year, pretty much our church closed on the first Sunday of lockdown, and it hasn't reopened since then. We almost did 3 times, but every time we do, something happens and we can end up back. I wonder, do you think people are going to, more and more people have found themselves in the same situation as you, that as they drift off from organised church, but do you think that might be accelerated a little bit by what we've all experienced?
I think sadly it is, Stewart, and if I can be slightly critical, I think a lot of churches, as I've suggested earlier, just there's no over much focus on worship. I'm not saying worshipping God is not important, or that in the Reformed tradition, rooting teaching into that and rooting the sacraments in. I'm not saying they're not important at all. They're life-giving when done well. But no fellowship. I used to joke that too many churches I was part of, it was like Groundhog Day, the old movie. Because you go in, how are you? Fine. What are you doing tomorrow? Back to work. You go back next week, how are you? Fine. What's going on? But at their best, the Christian communities, whether it was the old summer mission teams or, youth work action teams or this URI group that I was part of, there was a sense that people really knew you, and the people would say to you, Paul, how's your mum? I was involved in, and I'm not being critical, I'm just making a comment, Stuart. My dad died when I was in Edinburgh. Nobody visited. Because I don't know why. Maybe the people didn't know what to say. But nobody from the local churches visited. Folks who were part of the wee Christian group that were planting the church did. I compare that with when my mum died and we were on Mull. So my life is around Argyll Islands. But we were on Mull with Uri. We were doing a camping trip. And I remember standing in a circle with them saying, I would rather not be here because my mum we just found out it collapsed and we're trying to get off the island. And saying, I'd rather not be here. But if I have to be in this situation, I wouldn't be with better people. And it was that quality of relationship. It was that quality of relationship, Stuart, that at the times of my mum's dying or other people having problems with their families or illnesses or jobs, we talked. And from those relationships came great times of worship or community service or prayers. I think that's been the bedrock for me. And that would be the path back in for me into Christian community, are these real relationships.
That really resonates with me. And very recently, last week, the title of that I gave the sermon after I'd written it, it wasn't where I started, but was "This is not it." And talking exactly about that, inviting people to come along and come to church. That's not it. That's not the thing. The thing is the relationships that we have with each other and God, and the things that we do in church are, for me, just a way of helping us to do that. And if they become anything other than that, then we're not doing them right. But they're a bit forced on relationship.
Absolutely sure. I remember it's about our history, and that a lot of churches don't have church halls. And I remember someone saying the reason they don't have church halls is you didn't need them because folk knew each other.
Yeah.
And churches that didn't have, as most of them don't have, social hours or tea afterwards, it was because the community, the society, the culture did all that. Yeah. And the church could therefore just focus. You knew your neighbours. You loved your neighbours. They looked after you. And so when you went to worship, you just did the worship thing. But as society and culture don't do those things quite so well anymore, then the church has forgotten that people still need those things. Yeah. And so that the church needs to be more involved in the fostering of relationships, the pastoral support of people, and that worship then flows out of community. I say sometimes, worship doesn't create community. Community creates worship. Yeah. And if you get real community, real Christian community that is about forgiveness and acceptance and judgment, in a sense, your good pal says to you, come on. then out of that real community comes a sense, I want to be worshipful, I want to be thankful to God for this. Yeah. But if we just start with the worship, I don't think we ever end up with a community.
Yeah, because it becomes, it's just a thing that people come to for an hour and then go away again, like any other kind of show. It's
a consumer. Yeah. That's right, we consume rather than creating.
Yeah. I started off lockdown thinking in a slightly annoyed fashion that people would rather come to a coffee morning than come to worship. And now I'm really pleased that that's the case, that they would rather see each other than sit and listen to me. And, I think that's great.
And it's trying to hold that, Stuart.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll do it well, holding that community connectedness that people have really relished and have missed.
Yeah.
And if we can hold that as we somehow come through COVID, it doesn't matter whether a young person or old person, hold the warmth of those community connections that people have lost and missed, and nurture worship into that. Yeah.
One of the things that has obviously happened over it's not our fault, but one of the things that has happened over the period of our employment is that the number of people engaged with church has dramatically decreased. I think some of the stuff that we're talking about is that's why, that people don't find real engagement and real community. That they're fed up just coming and listening to the same sermon every week and singing the same 5 hymns, and it's the same, and that can be great. And it as you said, it can teach, it can inspire, it can do all kinds of things. But if it doesn't connect with where people are at during the week, then what's the point? And if people can't bring where they're at, then what's the point? Do you see? Because some of the stuff that you're describing there is about small, it's about local, it's about actually not a very big group of people. It's a fairly small group of people who you can get to know. So our church, we're really lucky in lots of ways. There's still more than 100 people come on a Sunday, but that's a lot of people. You can't really get to know 100 people properly. So do you think church needs to look different from that? And then, at some point we might all get together to do a thing together, but actually what we need is small groups like the one that you're talking about, where you can actually get to know each other and you can find out about them and ask those difficult questions and support each other and all that kind of stuff.
It was interesting what you said there, Stuart, I think the phrase you used was, you can't relate to all those people. You're exactly right. One person can't. And I suspect the key issue here is about leadership. We often, I think as leaders, do we collude with our congregations who want us to be the leader who does it all? Because that is very affirming. But it means that we can't do certain tasks like what we've just described. But if we can delegate leadership, so absolutely, it's small scale, it's small group, but we delegate leadership. So we whether it was like the old summer mission teams, like we said at the start, or the work teams that ran Youth Assembly, it was about delegating skills. So yeah, absolutely, you lead that, you get on with it. So I think there's a place for both, and that you delegate the leadership and you get the small groups and that ability to relate, but then you come together for the bigger act of worship or a bigger teaching maybe, or you come together for community impact, how you're going to impact the community together. So yeah, both, and I think, Stuart, the big gathering is encouraging and enthusing for worship, but the small groups are there. I remember someone talking about cathedral, church or cell, and instead of seeing these as 3 competing models of church, the cathedral that's big and impressive and runs events that everyone comes to from a wide area, or the church that's small, local, or the cell that is down to 3 or 4 people. We see them all as constituent parts of the whole, and each require different types of leadership.
Yeah, and they all meet different needs for people, don't they? Yeah. So they're not discrete.
No.
I like that idea that they're all part of a thing that makes a lot of sense. Actually, in terms of how we live our lives. We have small groups of friends, but then we have acquaintances, and then we have things that we go to that involve people that we don't know and will never know, but it's good to be together because we share we go and support the same football team, or we go to see the same band, or whatever that might be. We're all part of a thing together, but we're not friends.
And in youth work, that affirms that. We talked with Steve Mallon earlier. I remember Steve Mallon saying, have you got a pulse? Have you got a pulse? Yeah, you can do youth work. Yeah. So there's a role for a specialist, and there's a role for staff members, and a role for paid youth workers. But actually, if we can just encourage the ordinary church member that, yes, you can relate to young people. Yeah, that's what we do.
Yes. I like that. I sometimes feel as if I don't have a pulse, but that's a whole different...
Well, that's right. It'll be a tough week.
It's a whole different question. I'm going to finish with a question that I came across fairly recently, but it's a question that's been around. It's one of these kind of a good reflective question, and I saw it, in a blog post a couple of weeks ago, and it's been kind of milling around my head. And the question's a pretty straightforward question, so I'm going to ask you it and see what you think. The question is this: in relation, so we'll make it in relation to the pandemic and all the things that have happened. Instead of saying what can't we do, what does this make possible?
Wow,
yeah,
that's a good question. I think it makes possible this pandemic without minimising the hurt and the bereavements that people have been through and the deaths. Rethinking that forced exit, I think, is a lovely a lovely image. The amount of people have talked to me over the years, we need to change. We need to change. We have changed. And I think what we can do now, Stuart, this pandemic is making us ask the big questions. And we will not return to normal. We're not going to go back to the past, however much people want to do that. There's a line by John Vincent in the book Christianity Rediscovered, and it talks about us going neither to a place that's comfortable to us nor to the young people, but to a new place together. And I suspect this is a rethinking time to say, okay, what is gone is gone. What do you think about that question, Stuart? Maybe get back to you sometime on it.
Yeah. As I said, it's been rattling around my head since I heard it, because I think it's very easy to frame everything that's happened as negative, because there's so much loss in all kinds of ways. Whether that's I can't go out for a coffee with my pal, or as you said, the huge number of people who have suffered bereavement and the loss of employment and the things that have happened to young people in school and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, it does open up possibilities, because it's forced us to stop. I think that's the kind of primary driver in some of that.
And there's a personal comment, Stuart. It's also opened me up to the possibilities of work like this. Mm-hmm. I'm doing training with a couple of churches, and I joked one night that I live in Dunoon, and one night I went to was it Gia, Dunoon, and Kelso in one night. Yeah, and that was good.
Yeah.
So in some ways it's linking people up, and that was at another training event, and there were folks from Dunoon and folks from Oban there. Mm-hmm. Great, good 2-hour training session. Yeah. We saved on these individual churches' training budgets because there was no travel for me. Yeah. We cut down on the amount of time these folk were away from their families. So there's some good things. If we learn to hold on to that and bolt that back onto face-to-face, which is always a key for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not the same, but it's not impossible.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. I think that kind of sense that, we're going to do something for an hour. And it actually lasts for an hour. It doesn't last for a half hour on the front and a half hour on the end and the hour in the middle. Yeah. So really, it's, click, we start, click, we stop, and I can, I'm in my house. I can go and make myself a coffee, and I can get my dinner or watch the telly, or, that's a huge change. Mm-hmm. And much bigger than I think we realise, actually. Yeah. And in terms of how we use, I've said before, I worked for the United Reformed Church, which, its head office is in London. And so I would go to London for a meeting, so I'd spend 4.5 hours on the train, be in Church House for, could be a day, I could get there at 10 o'clock, leave at 4 o'clock, and then come home. So you're, the meeting's the same length of time as the travel. Kind of thing. And that's you. The next day you're good for nothing, because to get there for 10 o'clock, you've actually got up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go on the train. And it's fine, but it doesn't make an awful lot of sense, because everybody at the meeting had done the same thing.
Yes.
You know, there's two people that actually live in London, and they don't really live anywhere near Church House because nobody can afford to live around there. So even if they live in London, it's taking them an hour to get there. You know, whereas we can all sit in our house and have a perfectly reasonable conversation, and then please stop and go and have your lunch. And it's a different kind of tiring, but it makes a lot of things, as you said, makes them possible, including your new venture, which is great.
Yep. I know, because when I set it up, Stuart, I really wanted, what I've always enjoyed is kind of watching. You know, you're involved in a setting, you're watching what's going on, and then you sit with the worker afterwards and say, so tell me about that and what you're learning. And I really hope, you know, to get back into that. But at this stage for Youth Work Journeys, it's been good to be able to say to you, okay, we'll talk on the phone for an hour or so, and then I can deliver this training to you next week. What time suits you? Yeah.
Brilliant. Paul, it's been fantastic to catch up, and that's one of the things that has been made possible is these kind of conversations, because you know, we would meet when we meet. You know, we kind of bumped into each other a number of times over the years, usually because you were teaching the class after I was teaching.
That's right, and you were to help me with the technology.
But here we are, you know, you're in Durin, I'm in Stonehouse, and we're having a conversation, which is brilliant, you know. So for me,
I've enjoyed that.
Some of this is great, and it's really good to see you. And I wish you every success with Youth Work Journeys.
Thank you.